Medium here for the rest of the show, and I should tell you that I'm backed up by quite a staff of people between here and Menlo Park, where Stanford Research is located, some 30 miles south of here. And if every one of us does our job well, it'll all go very interesting, I think. The research program that I'm going to describe to you is quickly characterizable by saying, if in your office you as an intellectual worker were supplied with a computer display backed up by a computer that was alive for you all day and was instantly responsive, instantly responsive to every action you had, how much value could you derive from that? Well, this basically characterizes what we've been pursuing for many years in what we call the Augmented Human Intellect Research Center at Stanford Research Institute. Now, the whole session is going to be devoted. So I'm putting in an entity called a statement, and that's full of other entities called words. And if I make some mistakes, I can back up a little bit. So I have a statement with some entities' words, and I can do some operations on these. I can copy a word. I can say that word like copy after itself. In fact, that pair of words I'd like to copy after itself, and I can just do this a few times and get a bit of material there. And there are other entities like text. Say after there, I'd like to copy from that entity point to that point, and it'll copy it. Great. So I could get myself some material on my blank piece of paper, and then I'd say, well, this is going to be more important than it looks, so I'd like to set up a file. So I tell the machine, all right, output to a file. And it says, well, I need a name. I'll give it a name. I'll say it's sample file. And I'll say, please output it. It says it did. And then it comes back automatically with an origin statement or header telling me the name of the file and the date and the time and who established it. And thereafter I can always do something. I can ask for the status of a file, and it'll tell me that information. And just make sure you understand we're shifting from illustrative material to the real working stuff, in case you wouldn't recognize it otherwise. We've used this tool to do our daily work, and our system has been built, this time-sharing system, for about 6 months now. It's been working, and in that time we've gone from getting one console to getting about 6 working now, with 6 more due the rest of the spring. This is our 4th computer in which we've had this kind of a system, so we've learned a lot about the user features we want and how to be fairly skillful. But this next step about learning how, when you're faced with having this in your office all day, as I now do, in a very exciting sense, how do you put that to work for yourself? How do you organize your files? What kind of things do you do? So to get going on this, let's switch away from the tool we have here and talk about some of the general features of the program, some of the ways it's built, and get back a little later to the nature of our usage of it. All right, let me get back my marker down and say, let's save that version. So this tool, in pursuing those goals, one of our principal tools is this computer aid system. Let's talk about it as a system. There's a link sequence to jump in there too, where we talk about NLS, meaning online system, a very general term. It's going to be NLS for many, many years, an online system that will evolve. Right now we consider it to be primarily an instrument and a vehicle for helping humans to operate within the domain of complex information structures. Well, what do we mean by operate? Well, compose, study, modify is the place we started now. We know there are many other analytic things you could do, but we want to get around, study, and modify. And then to further information about what does complex structure mean. We're talking about complex structure and emphasizing structure because we say, although the content represents your concepts, there's a structural relationship between that content entities that should represent the relationship between the concepts of human thought. All right, we never can do that very well with linear text. So inside the computer we can represent that. quite well. In fact, we can represent information structures in a computer that would generally be far too complex for you to study directly. But NLS serves as a tool to roam over that, navigate through a complex structure, be able to find your way and be navigating, move about it rapidly, and be able to see what you want to see at any given point. That's how we think of NLS as a tool. All right, these are all very important concepts to us because these, together with the bootstrapping, have told us where to start. We start by building an instrument that we can sit at and work during our day to organize the kind of working information we need as a task force developing systems. We need to write our specifications, our plans, our programs, our users' guides, our documentation, our reports, and even our proposals. So, about control devices, we'll use this overhead camera shot where you can see the devices that I'm using. I use 3, and they're not all standard. We have a pointing device called our mouse, a standard keyboard, and a special key set we have here. And we're going to go for a picture down in our laboratory in Menlo Park and pipe it up that'll show you from another point of view more about how that mouse works. Come in, Menlo Park. Okay, there's Don Andrews' hand in Menlo Park. And in a second we'll see the screen that he's working and the way the tracking spot moves in conjunction with movements of that mouse. I don't know why we call it a mouse. Sometimes I apologize. It started that way and we never did change it. All right, as it moves up or down or sideways, so does the tracking spot. And the principles for its operation are quite easy to see. If you'll turn it over, Don. Can you hear me, Don? Would you turn it over and we'll see, right. Its principle is that there are 2 wheels that roll on the surface. But since they're at right angles and kind of sharp edges, one will roll and the other slide in one direction. Each of these wheels controls through a potentiometer with a voltage output sampled by an 880 converter, the numbers taken in by the computer at sample times as to what the horizontal vertical components are to be of where it should put the tracking spot. And as the mouse moves over a surface, then each of those wheels either slides sideways without rolling or rolls an amount that very closely duplicates the particular component of horizontal or vertical in the net motion it makes. All right, if you take a mouse and move it through some closed trajectory back to exactly the same point, usually the tracking spot won't come back to exactly the same place it was on the screen. And for that sense, it wouldn't work well if you're trying to trace maps or other figures and diagrams. But the way we use it continuously and exclusively is to watch the screen and to follow it around, and we use this merely as a device to move that tracking spot, and you're eyeing the tracking spot, you really don't care whether it follows exactly this or not. In fact, we've had it at times where our tracking device, you had to move in an arc like that to make the tracking spot go on a horizontal line. And people adjusted to it and would go like that to go in a straight line and wouldn't even know that they were doing it. Other features of the mouse are that it stays put. I can lift it and replace it without having the spot change, so I can adjust where I want it for my comfort. And these control buttons on the top are used quite a bit, and I'll show you a little bit later how some of those are used. Now, the keyboard in the middle is essentially a standard typewriter keyboard except for a few special keys out on the side. The computer knows it instantly when you hit one and makes an appropriate response. This device over here is unique to us, and we always have to justify and explain it. We'll do it in reverse order. We'll explain it first. It provides for you the one-hand equivalent of what you can do with a keyboard. We'll dialogue for them. And a little bit later, when we tell you about the programming, Jeff Rulison will bring in some special examples to you of the languages we've used actually to program at high level these functions and the control feedback that we get in these control dialogue. But that's what we're going to call the control meta language in there. Let's see how we're doing here. Okay, let's move our little marker to say we've now gotten control techniques by us. And let's talk about implementation of our online system. I put over here a reminder. When I jump to here, I want the view on below it to unfold in a certain way. So I've just told myself, hit those parameter specs when this is large, and then execute. And yes, I see that underneath I am going to talk next about hardware design and then software design, and that's going to be done by Jeff Rulifson from Menlo Park. Hardware design inviting me to jump on a link here. Aha. He told me there wasn't such a thing as a link under there. Bring me back to remembering how I should have gone through this. To go down another level in hardware design, there are two features we want to talk about here to bring out to you the way in which we've gotten the kind of responsiveness and flexibility we need in this instrumentation environment. So way off in Bill English's file, Bill was responsible for the design of all of our hardware. There's an outline he made of the way the controllers work for the I/O controlling. Now from this line to the right, things that we added to a conventional SDS 940 system. And this is the swapping drum. It's got two buses accessing to four 16K banks. The CPU has one bus and the peripheral equipment has another. And the good work of Project Genie at Berkeley, an ARPA project that evolved the 940 time-sharing hardware and software, produced a very neat priority system on this bus such that it can say, I'll defer my access to a given bank until the CPU doesn't want it. Or I'll defer it once or twice or three times, but then I really need it, so give me priority. And in that way, this bank can slip in many accesses to these while the CPU is hopping from bank to bank in its successive accesses. We've taken advantage of that to put all of our control out here, a large 96 million character Bryant disk for giving backup storage for ourselves, our two display systems, each of which drives 6 displays, and all of which are refreshed out of core, and the input controller which samples the keyboards, the key sets, the mice of each station about 15 times a second, and our printer and the ARPA network coupling here all come in through that same priority basis. So they can all be working full tilt, and we find that we get very low interference in CPU cycles being interrupted or interfered with, something like a ratio of maybe 1 to 1.5% here that it can't get when it wants to, and this might be running 50, 60, 70% of the available memory cycles that it can handle. All right. The input controller stuffs it into core without ever interfering with the CPU's process, and then just interrupts the time-sharing system if there's something new and says, hey, take care of this user. And the display system reads out of core in from a tree structure-like set of links to cycle itself automatically and take Menlo Park and get a view from a camera there and actually looking at the hardware. So these are the units that develop the displays. The computer constructs it right on a small high-resolution CRT, which you're focusing in on right now. And in fact, that's the CRT whose camera on the right, looking at it, is generating the text view that's being piped down here on my console. So as those are faded in and out between the two, you can just sort of compare them. So that's very nice. There's my mouse moving around in Menlo Park, my tracking spot. So our displays work with those being watched by commercial cameras. Look at my black bug. Commercial TV cameras, 875 line scanning rates, so they're fairly high resolution. Look at that. From there on out to the display station, the standard video microwave system. If we back up the camera shot a little bit, we'll see that we have a whole rack full of equipment here, serving 12 of them, but you'll notice quite a lack of cameras mounted on. We seem to have stolen them all for this show. So we only have several consoles that work right now because the cameras are mounted to give you these different special views. All right, there are quite a few advantages. We use this particular display system hardware technique pretty much as an expediency for an experimental system we had to build. We originally were going to build storage tube displays into here, but we couldn't get them delivered a year and a half ago when we really had to firm up our design. So we, as an expediency, went to this. Rand has been developing some very nice video stuff. They were kind enough to show us how these controllers and all would work with video. So we went ahead with this very simple brute force way of having the video signal generated by looking at a small CRT. Well, it turns out that that little CRT, its incremental cost, the video camera, the controller, and a monitor total about $5,500, which is cheaper than most fairly good resolution random deflection display monitors would be. So we come out well on the price of the hardware. Turns out that also that the cathode of the camera tube in just black and white usage like this, you can back off the scanning current of it so that it's a sticky cathode, so that actually it doesn't erase the image on it by each sweep. It may take 3 or 4 scans. And so with something like a 15 cycle a second refresh rate on those CRTs, the camera, the one that's generating this as well as the one we looked at it with a few minutes ago, have short-term storage in there. It's quite different from long persistence, but gives us the flicker-free display here for quite a flickery display there. This lets us use that display generation hardware for 3 to 4 times as many display stations as otherwise. You'll notice if we get just the text alone that there's a small effect by that bug smearing, but it's not that bad. And that comes from the memory in the Vidicon tube. If I label 13, we'll switch over. So in his display, he sees my text, so I'll execute it. And sure enough, it does. But what's that running around? Well, if he's looking at my text, he'd like to have something to say about it. So we put on a marker, a tracking spot that he controls. So he's sitting there in Menlo Park looking at this text, and he can point to it. But we've carefully reserved for me the right to control and operate on this, so my bug is more powerful than yours. But we can have an argument. Yeah. That's what they call a bug fight. So, all right. So in case you haven't been listening, Bill, we've been going through lots of examples and setting up in collaboration here so that we can go on into information retrieval. And we've set up now audio coupling, and then we're both looking at the same display, and that'd be very handy to work. We can talk to each other and point, and maybe later I could hand you the chalk on this blackboard, like saying, here, you control it. But let's stay this mode now and add another feature that hardware-wise is available to the kind of display we have. I'd like to see you while I'm working on it. So before I can do that, I have to set up my display in a certain way. Set it up so I see it over like that. That leaves a corner up there, and I say, now computer, do the automatic switching that'll bring in a camera picture from the camera mounted on his console, such as the camera mounted on mine is. Hi, Bill. That's great. Now we're connected audio. You can see my work, you can point at it, and I can see your face, and we can talk. So let's do some collaborating. This on a chair that I can get up, move around, and sit down, and swivel, and rock, and lean back, and work. Very relaxed. So I think this is a very exciting stage. We've just gotten it. And in our open house, we have a full office that's equipped like this with this kind of a console that we're very excited about, and we invite you to come to. And without being formal, I'd like to really say that I'm backed up by a really very tremendous team of these 17 guys who have caught the spirit of putting on this show tremendously and have just done an overwhelming job about putting it all together and about backing me all these years in this wild dream of doing this sort of thing. And they're all catching fire, and I want to just tell them all right now, I owe them a lot. And a very final credit goes to my wife and daughters who are out here, to whom I'd like to dedicate this whole presentation because of what they've put up with over these years, with a husband that dedicated in a monomaniacal way to something very wild. And so this whole presentation is dedicated to you 4 people there. And I thank all the rest of you very much for coming to the dedication ceremonies. Good day.